All right, so I'm here with Kelly Ford, the leader of the DNN Docs team, and we're coming to you from inside of a DNN Digest edition. So we definitely appreciate you tuning in. There's been a lot of exciting things happening in the world of DNN documentation, and we have the man here to have a short conversation with us. So, yeah, no, that's you, Kelly. So I guess the first thing, before we kind of really dive into it and get into it, the high level question that I think we should ask is, what is DNN Docs? So if somebody clicked on this video and they are not aware of anything that's been going on, how would you tell them what DNN Docs is?
Well, it kind of grew out of 10 plus years of frustration of doing development for DNN and the lack of documentation that persisted over those years. And with the kind of the renewed community spirit and effort, I figured now was the best time if we wanted to grow the ecosystem, that we needed to really come back and give a serious revisit to improving the documentation for developers as well as for users of the platform. So I think that really will strengthen the ecosystem overall, and of course make everybody's job easier on a day-to-day basis. So that was the genesis of it, and I started talking to people in the community, and we got together this nice core team, and we decided to put together something from scratch based on the documentation effort that had been made by DNN Corp, but had been left essentially to languish, I think, for a couple of years. And so using that, and with the help of Corp donating that content to us, we built the Docs project, and we tried to do it in a way that was, unlike previous attempts, it's not controlled by one person or one company. It really is owned by the community, because when you're working with something day in and day out, you run into problems, you're looking for a solution, and you don't find it. Well, now you can actually write your own solution and contribute it back to everybody else, so that everybody can benefit from what you found out or from your knowledge. And of course, it goes from large contributions to small contributions. If you notice a single little typo, maybe the word "not" shouldn't be there in the documentation for a particular sentence, you can just go ahead and change that. That was our goal, really, was to allow the community to own documentation and work on it so that it would be a living document.
Awesome. Yeah. So you brought up a couple of good points, and the one is that the documentation was handed to the community from DNN Corp. So our starting point was, what the documentation used to be or was. So if someone is looking at the documentation and, they have the question of, why is this structured this way? Or why is this image, like it is? I guess it's important just to have the context of like, hey, we got it like it was, and now we're trying to work it into what it should be.
Right.
Awesome. So when you talk about it being a living and breathing document, it's kind of a paradigm shift that the community really needs to pick up on, and that is that the community owns the documentation, right? So no longer should the community be saying, oh, well, documentation sucks, or I can't find, documentation I need, because you now can, contribute it. Even if you don't contribute the content, you can create an issue, right? And let the maintainers of the Docs project know, like, hey, we really need content in this area. So that's kind of a light bulb moment, right, that needs to happen. And it kind of parallels, a lot of things that are happening within the DNN community, in the sense that, like, it's not how it used to be, right? We're now empowered. We control the core platform. We also control the documentation. So that is one big message that we want to get across.
It just makes sense that if we're in charge of the direction and the development of the platform, we should be responsible for doing the documentation for the platform.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you that these successful projects, if you look at, I don't know, so some of the sites that I go to that have awesome documentation, they're also the companies or platforms that are highly successful, right? You look at Particles documentation, that's awesome. Microsoft's documentation is great. Twilio's documentation is really good. So I think if somebody comes and sees great documentation, then they think like, hey, there's a awesome community or a group of people behind this, and it's up to date and active, and that's a reflection on the platform. So I'm totally buying into that.
Yeah, the success of any software project and hardware project too really depends on the documentation. I've believed that for many years, as long as I've been a developer almost. And, Xmod Pro, my product, I actually wrote the documentation while I developed the product so that it would be in depth. And it was really a way for me to capture all of the details that go into something, because it's a fairly complex program. So
Yeah.
that ended up being 400 pages. And comparing that to what had been available when I was doing regular DNN development, there was nothing out there for me. There was scattered documentation in wiki articles, various blog articles, etc. And so I think if we can bring all of that knowledge together from the community and leverage it, everybody's going to be strengthened by it.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So let's let the people stop looking at me and you so much, and we'll actually click into the DNN docs. So, or go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to let you start. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess the first question, and this is one that I've heard from, several people when they come to, the URL, which is dnndocs.com, they see this docs preview. So for anybody who asked the question, what does preview mean? How would you answer that?
We kind of covered it a little bit early, but basically the preview is just there to let you know that, hey, this is a fully functional documentation site, but it is still in the process of being developed. We haven't fleshed everything out. We are still in the process of converting. I mean, we've converted the documentation center from dnnsoftware.com/docs into this new format, but we have a lot of work to do. The content is there for you to reflect on and use, but it's a work in progress. We're going to be moving things around probably. We are going to be doing things differently as we go forward. We just want you to be aware that this is a work in progress. And of course, you as a community member can contribute to that progress.
Gotcha. So kind of like not production 100% yet, but heading that way.
Yeah.
So you recently posted a blog which talks about some of the updates, and you talked about debuting at DNN Summit. So I want to ask you a question about the updates. So what are some of these updates that we can speak to, and has anything happened with the Docs project since DNN Summit?
It's really weird. There was a lot of work on the team's part, and the team did an excellent job getting things ready for the summit so that we could debut it at the summit, this preview version. Normally when you build up to something big, a crescendo like that, there's a period of letdown afterwards, and people kind of go their own way and do their stuff, especially for a community-based project like this. But I was amazed that coming out of the summit, we just got better and better, and we redoubled our efforts. We added more stuff to it, and we started to get contributions. So the momentum behind the Docs project, I actually think, increased as a result or after the DNN Summit preview.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's always good. I feel like the conferences are like family reunions, and it just kind of puts gas on the flame, so to speak, to get involved. As I'm scrolling through the blog here, there's, definitely a couple things to address. This one here, I think, is a pretty big one, the automatic build and deployment. So what does that really mean for the novice or someone who may not, speak DevOps?
So one of our primary goals was to make this, like I said earlier, a living document. Documentation is only as good as how fresh it is and how up-to-date and accurate it is. So if we are going to foster and encourage community involvement, we want the community to be able to see the benefits of those changes as quickly as possible. And so the way you do that in the modern age is you create a process that is going to pull from GitHub, any changes that have been made to the repository. Going to pull from that. It's going to do whatever build process it needs to do, and then it's going to spit out the results to a web server or something like that. In our case, we're actually we're using the DocFX tool, which is an open source tool from Microsoft, and we're using that to build static HTML pages that we then push out to a static site on S3 that is fronted by CloudFront, the CDN. So one of the primary things for us is we wanted to automate that entire process. So whenever we actually make a merge to our repository, whenever we make a big change or even a minor change to our repository, within anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how long the build takes, that change is going to show up immediately for everybody to see on the live site. And so that is huge. It can go on. I don't have to be awake. You don't have to be awake. As if someone else is actually approves a pull request and merges it with the master, then that will show up on the live site for everybody in the world to see, regardless of time zone.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's so the pull requests that I have submitted, which are typically basic in nature, right? But like you submit the pull request and then you get a notification like, hey, you know, this has been reviewed. Oh, it's been approved. And then that kickoff, that build process kicks off. And then, you know, you can go to the site shortly thereafter and it's live on the site. So that's awesome that, you know, to know that you could contribute something and potentially if one of the core team members is around to, you know, review the pull request, that it could be live on the site within minutes.
Yeah. And that is something I didn't talk about. Well, I talked a little bit about it in the blog. One of our other goals is to try to, as much as we can, we want to try to process those pull requests as quickly as possible, providing more immediate feedback if we're able to. And if we're able to make those changes, we want to go ahead and make those changes as quickly as possible so everybody else benefits from it.
Awesome. So one of the things that we were talking about, or actually you mentioned it here in the blog, is the recognizing contributors. So like if we go back to the home page here, we can see, you know, the people who are making contributions, and then also like at each page. So for example, I've got this other tab open here on creating a module. You can see people who have contributed to this document are listed at the top. How is that being done? I think that's awesome. And, you know, where are you getting the data and how are you pulling it off?
Well, we're just making it up, actually.
Yeah.
No, major shout out to David Poindexter for all of the work he did in really ferreting out how to do this within the DocFX tool. But we're live integrated with the GitHub API. But we're pulling in contribution information. People who are actually committing to the repo, we're pulling it in. Now that stuff there is still not live. It's under the Explore the Docs section. Those avatars there aren't exactly live.
Okay.
That's a goal for us to get that.
That's why we're in preview, right?
Yes, exactly. But the top contributor section there on the homepage, and as you mentioned, on the topic pages, the articles, not the API, but the articles, is a live reflection of who actually contributed to that topic. And that is another way for us to say, hey, this is owned by the community, and we appreciate the contributions that you're making. We want to recognize you for those contributions. And again, shout out to David Poindexter for helping with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a way, you know, that you're able to humanize the documentation, right? Because docs can kind of be a dry subject or topic, you know, oftentimes. And seeing the people that have made the contributions, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, basically.
While you're there on that page, actually, I want to point out a couple of other things that we added beyond the contributors. There in that line with the contributors, you'll see that there is a time to read and a date, essentially a freshness date for the documentation. This is the date that that particular topic was last updated. And we all run through this, especially when you're reading blog posts these days that are really just designed for SEO. They don't put dates on them anymore. So you don't know how fresh the information is. You don't know if it's, you know, there's been a new major release of the software. Does this really apply anymore? Was this written yesterday or was it written 5 years ago? So this is our effort to kind of give you an indication as to how fresh that information is.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's great you bring that up because I kind of skipped it, and it's definitely relevant. And that, again, is work of David Poindexter, I believe, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. So in the blog, you also mentioned the better, where's it at? Better navigation, but better searching. Yeah. So can you speak to, and when you talk about search, I assume we're talking about, you know, search, right? Module.
Yep. So again, one of the things that documentation has to have is excellent, excellent searching. And it was just too difficult to find the information that we want without finding a really good search solution. Now, at the DNN Summit, we had a fast search solution because DocFX has this library called Lunar built in. It is a client-side library, though. So what happens is when you went to the site to begin with and you started typing, it might take a couple of minutes because it was downloading a several megabyte index file so that you could do your search. After that, it was fast, but it was slow to begin with and certainly not user-friendly. And it didn't break things out and give you a much better search experience. So what we did was we hooked up with Algolia, and they have a project called DocSearch, which allows open source projects like DNN to integrate. Basically, they have a crawler that'll crawl the site, and they have just fabulous searching facilities. So you can see right there the way that you can do a search for like user or anything else you might find in the documentation, a full text search. It will find it for you, and it will pop it up, and you can find what section something is in, where it'll highlight the words that you're searching for. Very easy to tell if any of those instances or those items in the list are what you're looking for. Awesome. And this can be tweaked going forward. We can see if people are searching for something that's not there, that we can use that information to inform our decisions as to what topics to create going forward, or we can tweak the index so that we can find things that are specific to DNN, certain types of words that might be or lingo that's used in DNN. We can surface that and customize the search a bit more. So we're really proud of that.
Yeah, no, that is awesome, and it's awesome that Algolia offers that to open source projects, right?
Yes, it's huge. So they deserve a pat on the back for that.
Yeah, definitely good to have a powerful search engine or search mechanism in the doc. So in the blog, you referenced some work by our friend Peter Donker here. So one thing that I was kind of surprised to learn is that, the documentation kind of overlaps with the core platform in certain areas. And when I think about documentation, I don't always think like, hey, this could show up somewhere in Visual Studio when I'm actually writing code and things like that. So if you can expound a little bit on that, and then also talk about what Peter has done here in this specific page, which is obviously this class settings repository, but he made a pull request and got some people excited. So what's going on with all this?
So the first thing is that, to my knowledge, never before has the source code of the API documentation been integrated within the documentation center. It's always been a separate site at best. It has never been particularly user-friendly. And so that was one of the primary goals that we wanted to address as part of the documentation project. So we needed to find a tool that would read the inline documentation from the source code files and produce a documentation for it, and then integrate it with the rest of the articles and such that we have for the documentation center as a whole. Now, one of the things that we were trying to figure out is how can we make the documentation for the API better? If you're a developer for DNN, you'll find that there are a lot of magic numbers or magic words. There is a lack of documentation as to, in some cases, as to, I don't know what the limit is for a particular argument that goes into a procedure, for instance. We wanted to be able to provide more context to each of these, or to the important parts of the API documentation, without burdening the actual source code. Part of our project is going to be to go through the source code comments and enhance those, add missing comments as well. Yeah. But for this particular piece, we wanted to find a way that we could augment what is in the source code, but still have it integrated deeply into the resulting documentation that comes out of the source code. And that's what we've done here. DocFX gives us this concept called Overwrite Files. And Peter created really an example of how you can do this in the documentation center. So on this particular one, if you scroll down to the remarks section, that paragraph, up a little bit, yeah. So
I'm sorry, I was going down right here.
Yep. Yeah, so that paragraph there and the heading and the source code, or the highlighted syntax, highlighted source code below it, all of that has been added to the documentation for the API without actually touching the source code for the D&M platform. He actually adds more stuff below it. This is all stuff about, oh, how do you do this? How do you work with this particular class? That's the kind of stuff that especially new developers and experienced developers are going to want to know. So we now can add this kind of stuff directly to the source code without, well, not directly, but we can augment the source code comments with this additional stuff without burdening or overloading the source code with excessive comments.
Yeah, and I notice as I'm scrolling over here on the side, it's like telling me basically where I'm at, and then I can click this link, and I assume that is like a anchor, right? So
yeah, it's a permanent link.
Yeah, you could give people, links to specific sections in the documentation. So it seems like you guys did your research when you selected the system, right? Because there's a lot of benefits coming.
Yeah, and of course you deserve credit for that too, because you're part of the core team. But yeah, this gets back to the whole community effort. A lot of questions are answered on outside of the documentation center. So people from the community are fielding questions on the D&N forums, on the Facebook groups, on Twitter, and we wanted to make it as easy as possible to reference parts of the documentation when you're answering a question for someone. So you don't just have to use the root URL for the page, but you can actually dive down deep into each section and provide a really specific link to a section in a topic for people as you're answering them.
Gotcha. That is awesome. All right. So when we talk about contributors, I mean, obviously you've got the core team, but I noticed that Brian Dukes had created an article, and in the comment thread or whatever on his pull request, it was like some excitement, going on. So when we talk about, two things we'll talk about is recent contributors or contributions that you may have been excited about, which I know this is one of them. And, we want to highlight this article. So what do we have to say about this?
Well, to be honest, I am excited for any and every contribution. Literally, if you make a fix to a typo or a spelling error, that makes the documentation look better. It's easy for you to do, and it's something that someone else doesn't have to, read through. So I don't want to focus solely on big contributions too. The small contributions are important, and they really do get me excited. But this one was really the first article that we've had submitted, brand new article submitted to the documentation from Brian Dukes. And Brian has been really instrumental in helping us kind of hone our GitHub workflow as well. But he added this, and I didn't really know. I'd been aware of module injection filters, but I didn't really know how to use them myself. I've been developing in D&N since version 1, and to see this was fantastic. So this was our first full article. Brian says he's got at least one more that he's going to be submitting in the near future. So we're looking forward to that. But it goes to show that brand new information that really isn't available elsewhere either can be repackaged or can be created just like Brian did here and added to the documentation. And it was added in a matter of days. We just went through and read it and made sure we had it in the right place and put it in. So we're looking for more contributions from Brian and everybody else too.
Yeah, so two things come to mind. The first one is that's an awesome example of just somebody taking initiative, right? They're like, hey, this is not there, and you know what? I've got the knowledge, so I can contribute it. And then the other thing is when we talk about consistency in the documentation and like enforcing not a style guide, but just one of the things that the docs team is doing, I think it's important that, we communicate that, like when people submit pull requests, we do try to read it and make sure that it is like easily consumable and that it flows in the same way that the rest of the documentation on the site does. So like even this article from Brian, there was some back and forth on like, hey, let's update this format or let's, do it this way. So that is one of the things or one of the tasks that the docs team owns is trying to enforce consistency when it's possible.
Yeah, that's something we're going to be working through. It's part of the preview process as well, and it's something we'll hone and get better with over time. But in this particular instance, we did some reorganization of paragraphs. We added some stuff that we felt might need to be in there because a newcomer would not really know what was going on. And
Yeah.
so we went through a couple of different revisions with Brian, and he was awesome at working with us. And so we got this up. But you bring up a good point. One of the things is we want to highlight and celebrate the contributors, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the documentation is written with a consistent voice. As with all documentation, if you have different people writing different things in different styles, it becomes hard for an end user to understand all of that. It becomes a bit more cumbersome and disjointed. So we want to try to go through this and enforce a voice and a bit of a writing style. We want people to feel free to be creative, but we do want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the understanding of an end user when they're reading through this.
Awesome. That is great to hear. All right, well, let's start kind of winding this thing down. When we talk about contributors, now you can go to the GitHub page here for DNN Docs and look at the contributor. So we've got, 13 contributors now. A lot of people. Yep. Will Stroll has made some pull requests, but he also did some other things. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Pat on the back to Will there. He went through some of our articles, and he didn't write a new article. He didn't just make a typo fix. In this case, he he rewrote parts of an article to make it easier to understand for people. So he was able to read it from an objective perspective and go, hey, I think we can make this clearer. And that's another type of contribution that people can make that we encourage.
Yeah, I think some of those were my articles, and then he was jabbing me over here on the side.
The other thing that Will did is he created a series of videos, too, on how to contribute to the docs. I don't know if you have that pulled up or not, but they're out hosted on YouTube.
Yeah, I think so that is actually, I probably can get it. I was going to go to his site and look at his blog.
That's cool. Yeah.
Adventures, YouTube. Let's see. Where's he at?
Oh, there it is. How to quickly update DNN Docs right there.
Yeah, I'm reading headlines and stuff. Yeah, so muted that. Yeah, so he's got, and he even puts a link here. That is awesome. But there was more than one video. Let's see if he's got playlist. Yeah, so there's both of them. 3 ways and so this one is 20 minutes and this other one here is 5 minutes. So this one's kind of like probably not as in depth, right? You can edit the browser versus like getting it up and running locally. So anyway, thanks Will for making these videos, and check out Stroll's videos.
Yeah, and again, he highlights there are several ways to contribute. So you don't have to be a Git expert. You can edit these things in the browser. But you can go all the way and you can host DocFX locally and preview it, etc. So it runs the gamut. We want to try to make it as easy as we can. It's not perfect, never will be perfect, but as easy as we can to make these contributions. And Will did a good job of helping to highlight that. So we appreciate that. Indeed.
So we've got some familiar faces showing up here, having made pull requests. So everybody, thank you for contributing, and we hope this list continues to grow. So, all right, let's wrap this up with one last question on some of the next steps and goals for DNN Docs, and I'll stop. Well, actually, I'll leave the screen share because you may want to point to some stuff here. What are you looking forward to? What's coming down the pipeline, I guess, for DNN Docs?
Well, there's some things we still have to work out and figure out how to do well. Like we want to eventually be able to put in the ability to filter by DNN version, so you can get information specific to your version or to the edition that you're working with, if you're working with Evoke or platform, etc. So you know what content applies to your particular scenario. So we'd like to integrate that if we can into the search process as checkboxes or something like that. We also want to get to a point, and this is kind of tool dependent, so we're kind of waiting on this. We want to be able to provide a way for those who can translate into other languages. We want to give them an opportunity to be able to make those translations of the documentation to make DNN available to a wider audience that way. And But beyond that, we really are going to start focusing on content creation. And we want people to help us in that content creation. So we really need some help in terms of the themes, the design aspect of it, content management, administrative stuff, as well as developer stuff. When it comes to the development, one of the things we want to work on, like I said earlier, is we want to start diving in actually into the source code as well to find things like the portal settings object in the DNN API. It needs some love when it comes to documentation. That's one of the ones that Mitch Sellers pointed out as one that a lot of people use and really requires some more documentation. So if anybody wants to take that on, who is working in the DNN platform documentation, that would be great so that we can get that into the API. And again, the things that every change you make in the source code to the comments, the inline comments, or the inline documentation for the source code, that will show up in our API documentation here on the site. You don't have to do anything else, just as part of the normal commit process for the DNN platform. So those are some of the things. We need to add more content articles. We're going to get to a point where we can start adding recipes and how-tos. We are looking at how to integrate video into this, and of course the source code stuff. So there's a ton of stuff coming down the pike, and we're going to continue to make changes to the UI to make it better. But we need your help. We need.
Yeah, I was going to say, sounds like the system and the tooling is on the way and about to be there, and the next step is for the community to continue activating and contributing.
Yeah, give us your feedback, open issues on our repo, submit pull requests, and we'll get that stuff taken care of and merged into the documentation. It's really exciting that people have started contributing already. So it's kind of invigorating to the entire team when that happens.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know that when I see pull requests, especially from people who haven't made one or don't often make one, and you're like, yeah, somebody's actually taking initiative and contributing to something. So it makes you feel good, right? So,
yeah.
But anyways, we definitely appreciate the time. If there's any final remarks you want to make, you can make them now.
No, just head to dnndocs.com, check it out. If you want to make some changes, you know where to go. Go to our GitHub repo.
Awesome. All right, Kelly. Well, I appreciate it, and we will get this into the DNN Digest. So looking forward to the updates coming down the road.
All right.